This video is brought to you by BetUS Sportsbook and Casino.
It's finally here. It's Penn State week. And you've heard from me in several different videos, and now it's time to hear from somebody on the Penn State side. And in this video, which is brought to you in part by BetUS Online Sportsbook and Casino, we're bringing on Alec Whitaker with Booze, Bets, and Ball. Alec, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. I appreciate you joining the show.
Of course, yeah. I will say one of the nice things about these home and home series is you get to meet a lot of people from the other fan bases because it's not just a one-off game. You know, you're thinking about them the following year then too. So getting to meet you and Paul over the last year has been fun. And I know same thing with some Auburn people the years before. So, I mean, these series, I know the athletic departments like them because they get a lot of money from them. But I think it's pretty good for fan bases too, especially ones that, you know, we never really saw Auburn. And I know West Virginia really hasn't been a thing in my lifetime. So to have series like this is definitely great.
Yeah, the last time they played, I think before last year, I think it was 92. I was 12 years old, and I don't remember it, to be honest with you. So I wasn't following college football as closely back then as I do now. So I don't remember it. So yeah, we're very excited. This is the biggest home opener we've had in quite some time. I mean, we had LSU come to Morgantown back in 2012, I believe it was, or 2011, somewhere in there. But it wasn't the first game of the season, so it's a little different. It's just a different feel because, you know, we've been waiting all off season for this day to get here, right? And it's finally here. Now, before we get into talking football, man, I got to ask, you and I kind of talked off air, Booze, Bets, and Ball. So you talk about more than football on your show. Kind of let the audience know what you guys are doing over there at Booze, Bets, and Ball.
Yeah, so there's four of us with the show. Nate and I, he does a lot of analytics stuff. That's kind of his background. He'll bring up a bunch of stats and stuff. So him and I pretty much cover the ball section of it, football. And then Tyler used to love, I guess, we're moved on now, the Penn State bar scene. So he was kind of the booze expert for us. And then we have Nelly, who loves to bet. So he always comes on, usually something a little goofy, some parlay that's 1 for 25. But we have fun just mixing it up, not just focusing strictly on the game every week.
Yeah, that's cool, man. Now, is that on YouTube and podcast as well, or where can I find it?
You could find it on podcast platforms under that name. On YouTube, it's on my YouTube channel, which is Whitaker Media. I do some other stuff. I do baseball stuff.
Gotcha.
A couple of friends of mine just started a betting show that I let them put on there. So we have a lot of different things going on there.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Since 1931, the attorneys at Katz, Cantor, Stone Street, and Buckner have been the voice for victims who have suffered serious injury or death. They have a fierce passion for truth and justice and a sincere compassion for those who have been wronged by others. Whether you have been in a car accident or fighting with an insurance company, or you or a loved one has suffered serious injury or death due to medical negligence, we will ensure your voice is heard loud and clear. Katz, Cantor, Stone Street, and Buckner will ensure there is justice for all West Virginians because we are your lawyer, your voice. Visit us at yourlawyeryourvoice.com. Have you guys picked out your drink of the week yet?
Yeah, so we usually we're recording the show on Wednesday, so we'll talk about it on Tuesday, but we haven't had anything picked out yet that I know of. But I know you mentioned moonshine with West Virginia, so we might have to go with that. Definitely excited to try that coming down. I think that'll be a good pick.
Yeah, there's different. Obviously, you can get different flavors of moonshine, right? But the best kind is the just straight up that somebody made in the mountains illegally, and that you just get in a mason jar with no label on it. That's the best kind, man. It'll make you twitch when you drink it, and you may have to crawl home, but it'll be a good experience. My wife says I'm not even allowed to drink moonshine anymore. So,
well, you know, this is the only time that we know we're going to be down in West Virginia for a Penn State game. So definitely got to go all out, try everything. I feel like.
Yeah. And we don't burn couches anymore, at least not in Morgantown, but we can still drink moonshine. All right. So we haven't lost all of our craziness yet. They can't take everything away from us, man.
That's
all right. So let's dive right into to football. And by the way, you can find Alec. I have his Twitter handle For those of you who are watching on the screen, for those who are listening, it's at PSU_strong on X, Twitter, whatever you call it today. And I've got his, podcast name there and his YouTube channel name scrolling along the bottom. Booze, Bets, and Ball on podcast and Whitaker Media on YouTube. So, Alec, man, let's dive right in. I want to hear from the Penn State perspective. A, and be honest, are you worried at all about the game? And B, if you are worried about it, what is your biggest concern going into it from, as far as what West Virginia brings to the table?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned this when I talked to Paul earlier in the summer, but last year, a lot of the nerves going into the West Virginia game for Penn State wasn't so much losing to West Virginia. It was more, how is Drew Allar going to look? Kind of, this team had a lot of expectations. It was more nervousness of the team living up to those expectations. This year, to me, it's a little different. There's actually nervousness about the game being in doubt. Obviously, I think being on the road is first, starters. You're always going to feel more comfortable at home, especially in college football with the way environments are in the sport. But I think, West Virginia finished the year strong last year. There's really no denying that. Garrett Green found himself. I think Neil Brown kind of went from hot seat to maybe possible extension if he has another year or two like that. So, there kind of seems like a lot of things turned around for West Virginia after losing to Penn State, which, that's a hard first game on the road. Like, to still go on and have a good year, not let that really, I think is, definitely commendable. And I just think that Penn State has a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of the core pieces come back. When Penn State fans will talk about core pieces, it's mostly the 2022 recruiting class, which would be Allar, Nick Singleton, Kaytron Allen, Drew Shelton, who will start at left tackle in place of Olu Fashanu this year. And then it's on defense, Zane Durant, the defensive tackle, and then the defense ends, Bill Carter, Denai Dennis Sutton, and then safety, KJ Winston. That's kind of the core they talk about. Now, these guys are in year 3, which is kind of, when you start thinking about prime years, so to say, in college football. Yeah. So they have those guys back, but it's 2 new coordinators, losing both offensive tackles. Pretty much the safety room's about the same. It's more or less a total remake in the cornerback room, which I think is something that they brought in some nice transfers and they had some nice younger pieces, but week 1, how's that going to go right away? Something to worry about. And then honestly, like receiver, they brought in Julian Fleming. I don't think he's all of a sudden going to become a number 1 that catches 70 balls for 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns or something like that. So I don't think they still have that game wrecker at offense or at receiver. I was at the game last year when Penn State played Ohio State, and both those teams were equally in a dog match. But when Ohio State kind of found themselves in a tough spot, they had Marvin Harrison Jr. to go to and make a play for them. And it was the difference in the game. And I just, kind of looking at Penn State's receiver room, I don't think they have that guy right now. Maybe one of these younger guys becomes that, but as of right now, I don't see it, and especially week 1. So I actually think if this game was maybe week 4 or 5, I feel a lot better. But because it's first game, trying to figure some things out on the offensive line and in the secondary, and 2 new coordinators, and West Virginia is obviously highly motivated and was really hot to end last season. Like, I think my worry last year was maybe like a 2. This year, I'd say closer to a 7.5 maybe. I still think Penn State wins, but I'm definitely more on, it's not going to be last year where from the 3rd quarter on, you were just kind of looking to see how the team was doing, how guys were looking. I think you're going to be fighting for your life a little more.
Yeah. Yeah. You brought up a couple points there I wanted to ask you about. I've done a couple videos the last 2 days. I dug really deep in, and I don't know how you feel about Pro Football Focus, but I dug really deep into the Pro Football Focus numbers for each team. And what it showed me was, again, I know Penn State has a lot more 4- and 5-star guys. I know they're putting more guys in the NFL, so I'm not trying to say West Virginia's equal from a talent perspective, but from a Pro Football Focus score, they are equal, pretty much equal. From looking at last year's numbers, and I found that very intriguing. I did not expect to see that, but the reason that is because West Virginia, the guys who they lost last year, primarily in the portal, versus the guys they brought in from the portal, huge improvement from a
Mm-hmm.
PFF grade. So I'm hoping that translates to the game. Now, we know it doesn't always do that, right? PFF is not a end-all be-all. It's not the gospel, but it is a metric you can use to try to, at least get an idea of how the guys play. But one of the things I noticed with Penn State was, obviously we know about Olu Fashanu, but they could be taking, even at the PFF numbers, they could be taking a step back a little bit on that offensive front. West Virginia's got a similar concern. We're losing Zach Frazier, Doug Nestor. Are you confident that the guys that are replacing Fashanu and the other two former starters are going to be able to keep that offensive line playing at the same level, or do you think there'll be a step back this year?
I think there'll be a step back, but that's realistic, honestly, because I think Fashanu and Caden Wallace, the right tackle, allowed a combined 2 sacks last year, I think. So, even if you can still have above average tackle play, and I still don't think it's that good numbers wise. I think it was kind of nice that, not for Fashanu's health at the time, but he missed some time at the end of the 2022 season, and Drew Shelton got to play the remaining part of the season. I think it was the last 4 games of the season in the Rose Bowl. And then last year, once Penn State fell out of the playoff picture, Fashanu started to go on pitch counts, so to say. So Shelton was getting reps again. So I feel good about him at left tackle. And obviously he's going up against Abdul Carter every day in practice now, which I think is going to help him a lot. I don't think he's going to be a top 11 pick like Fashanu was right away. Right tackle's a little more concerning. They brought in Nolan Rucci, a former 5-star guy who kind of spurned Penn State out of high school originally. He's competing with Anthony Donko, who's only a redshirt freshman. So it's kind of an older guy who hasn't had a lot of experience versus a younger guy with a lot of upside. So there's not a lot of experience at right tackle, really. So it's interesting if they're going to go with the more steady-handed Rucci or the guy with the higher ceiling in Donko. It sounds like they both might play against West Virginia. They're both kind of doing a couple things differently well right now. One's better in pass pro, one's better in run blocking right now. So I might depend on the situation of the game. If Penn State has to throw a lot more, I'm pretty sure Donko's the one that's doing better in pass pro. I might have them mixed up, but something like that might alter it. The interior, I think, will be okay. Nick Dawkins is a 5th-year guy. He hasn't played a lot, but he's been around a long time, so he understands the offense. The guys on the team trust him. He's voted a captain. So I feel okay there with him coming in. The guards are the same. But, yeah, I think early on they might struggle with some cohesion problems. But I think, my upside for them at the end of the year is that they could be pretty good. Obviously, that does not matter for you guys because it's week 1 and done. So, my outlook on the offensive line for the whole season is a lot more comfortable than it is in week 1.
Makes sense. And we're the same. I mean, we lost Zach Frazier. We lost Doug Nestor. Zach Frazier being a 2nd-round pick. He's going to be starting for the Pittsburgh Steelers in week 1. So, and Nestor, last I heard, he was on the Vikings roster. I'm not sure if he's made it or not, but I haven't kept track of that like I would like to. But similar situation, replacing Frazier is going to be Brandon Yates, who played right guard last year.
Okay.
He's a solid player. He's a 6-year guy, I think, 5th or 6th-year guy. Played a lot of snaps. Now, he's not Zach Frazier, but he has played a lot of snaps and is very experienced, so they trust him up there, just like you mentioned about Hawkins. Or is it Hawkins? Did I say that right? Dawkins, I'm sorry.
It's Daryl Dawkins' son.
Oh, it is. That's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Interesting. The other piece of that, before I get to you mentioned Abdul Carter.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that real quick, and then I'll get to the coaches. They're obviously moving him from linebacker to D end, right? Because of his pass rushing ability, I would assume. Do you know whether or not they're going to be playing him on the right side versus the left? Are they going to be moving him around? What is your take on that? Because I'm interested in seeing him and Wyatt Milam go at it, because Wyatt Milam has yet to allow a sack in 2 seasons at left tackle. So I'd love to see that matchup.
I think I have it down here. They have him listed on the right side, but I don't think that's in stone with him. Penn State, I know at least Manny Diaz did. Obviously, we're going to Tom Allen here, so I don't know how different his packages are. But especially in passing situations. Manny Diaz like to deny Dennis Sutton because he's a bigger guy, put him inside, and then you bring on Adisa Isaac and Chop Robinson on the outside. Obviously, those two guys are gone. So I think they're going to try some different packages too with Carter now, maybe bring him up the middle if they can. I know I was talking to Landon Tangwell, former Penn State offensive lineman, and he brought up the possibility of Hakeem Beamon going to end in some situations and then having kind of Carter come up the middle and do some different things, move Carter around. So I think because they're 4 deep at defensive tackling guys they like, I think, two of the smaller guys, Beeman and Zane Durant, have the flexibility to go outside a little bit. So that'll help them put the best 4 guys on the field, for the situation. But I also think gives them flexibility to move Carter around, which I don't think they'll be stagnant with them. Yeah.
And that's what I kind of suspected. A guy like that, you want him to, you want to move him around, put him at different, try to find a good mismatch for him. And I'm not saying he can't beat White Mile on occasion, but why line him up against the guy who's, arguably one of the best defensive tackles, our offensive tackles in football.
Yeah.
When you can put him over against somebody else who may not be as experienced, may not be as talented, test those guys out. And that's what I suspect that they'll do that some. Maybe try to test out, I mentioned Brandon Yates, or they might try to test Brandon Yates out, or some of these guys who haven't started as much, or maybe are playing different positions. Try to put the pressure on him like that. That's kind of what I envision. But I can't. That's going to be interesting to see where they line him up and those mismatches that they're trying to, that each side is trying to exploit in this game. It's going to be like a chess match. You mentioned Tom Allen, obviously coming over from Indiana, former head coach at Indiana. What's the feeling around the program and among the fans about him coming in to replace Manny? I know Manny Diaz doing a good job there. As an outsider, I thought he was anyway. What's the opinion about Tom Allen?
Yeah, I think it's more of a steady hand approach. Manny Diaz had that crazy approach where he called them chaos plays, or he just was obsessed with sacks and turnovers. He didn't really give up care how many yards he gave up. He thought the negative plays would outweigh giving up some yards, and for the most part it did work. I don't know if Tom Allen is that aggressive. I think we'll see. I think, he got high praises for being a pretty good linebacker developer at Indiana, which obviously does not have near the linebacker talent that Penn State does. So I think there's a lot of excitement about that. I think there's just a lot of excitement overall about what he did at times with an Indiana defense that wasn't talented and rarely had offensive help. So I don't think there's as much excitement as there is with Andy Kolnicki, and I think part of that is just because you definitely view AK as an update or as an upgrade, whereas Manny Diaz, in our eyes, was a top 2, top 3 defensive coordinator in football. So even though Tom Allen might be pretty good, you're just kind of hoping for, even keel there, just because it's very hard to upgrade from Manny Diaz. And maybe eventually Tom Allen gets to that point, but right off the bat, it's really not expected to be that. So I think it's just hoping the defense is what it has been, and then Kolnicki takes the offense to another level.
Interesting. Yeah, and Kolnicki's obviously West Virginia fans. We have firsthand knowledge of him from his days at Kansas. I was at the game in Morgantown in 22 when they beat us in overtime. And, man, he had our poor defense so confused the entire game, man. They didn't know where to line up. Now, some of that's on West Virginia's side, not having the guys prepared, and probably not having – according to the coaching staff, they were they basically overcoached them in a sense, and they were making things way too complicated. So last year they simplified everything and just focused on the fundamentals basically. But making sure guys were in the right spots and all that more so than scheme and all that.
Right.
And it worked a little bit. Defense still wasn't great, but it was better. But Andy Kolnicki, man, I've seen him even against other Big 12 teams. He's very good at using odd formations, motions, gadget plays, whatever it takes, man. He'll dial up some stuff and he'll have. I've seen really good coaches look just bumfuzzled out there because they're not like, what is he doing? So we're glad to get him out of the Big 12. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, you got to deal with him one last time.
Right, but I'm not looking forward to facing him, week one. The only thing that brings me some hope is, number one, our coaching staff has seen him enough times now.
Right.
They even coached against him when he was at Buffalo, when they were at Troy. So they are familiar with him. Of course, that goes both ways. He's familiar with them as well, right?
True.
But so hopefully they won't be taken by surprise this time like they were in 22. So that gives me a little bit of hope. But just overall, you kind of touched on it there, but just what is the overall feeling about Kotelnicki amongst the PSU fan base?
Yeah, I think they know the receiving talent isn't top of the line and what we've kind of been used to under Franklin. Because, I mean, Franklin, for the first 8 or so years of his tenure here, Penn State had good receivers. It was Chris Godwin, Deshaun Hamilton, and then it was Jawan Johnson, and then it was Jahan Dotson, KJ Hamler, Parker Washington, like guys that are playing on Sundays. So just kind of seeing the fall off there was a little discouraging, but I think the hope is that Kotelnicki can do a little more with less. And I know you brought up the movement and scheming and the motion, all that. And I think the plan is that he can maybe move these guys, get these guys open. If they can't do it themselves, put them in a position to get open. I think that's more or less the plan with the receivers, at least early on, until they can figure out 3 guys that are definitely going to start, kind of a circle of trust. I kind of look at the Penn State receiver room like a bullpen in baseball. We're going to try this out for a little bit, see who the guys we trust are. And then, when the playoffs come around, who are the guys we're going to put into the big spots. I kind of see a situation like that happening with the Penn State receivers, but I think he's going to rely on the running backs and the tight ends. I know he did wonders with Jared Patterson up in Buffalo, the numbers they put up in the rushing game. And I know, look, the competition's not the same, but Jared Patterson was a good running back. I don't think he's as talented as Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen. So I'm excited to see what he could do with them. I think he's going to find ways to put Beau Pribule on the field because he was so big with the dual threat quarterback game with Jalen Daniels down in Kansas. So I do think he's going to find packages for him. And honestly, after they fired Mike Yursich towards the end of last season, the staff that did take over, which was just kind of a mismatch of assistants helping out, they did find packages for Pribula, especially around the goal line and short yard situations. So I would expect that to continue.
Right.
So I think the nice thing is they have versatility in their offensive game. Maybe it's not as much talent as years past, but I think just because they have 2 running backs they love, they really think they're at least 3 or 4 deep at tight end. So I think, and they feel like they're 2 deep at quarterback and 2 guys that do totally different things. So I think they feel like that versatility can maybe make up for a lack of talent on, at least the offensive line early on and then at receiver. Right.
Yeah. And, he's going to but he will have more talent to work with probably. And this is not a shot at Kansas at all. Right. I mean, but, Penn State's recruiting at a different level than Kansas is. So it'll be interesting to see. This will be, I heard on another show, I think earlier today, actually, this will be the most talent he's probably ever had to work with in his entire career. So it'll be really interesting to see how he does. Hopefully he doesn't do really well with it in week 1, but it'll be interesting to see how well he does with it, throughout the season. Because he may not need to do all that stuff, all the motions and gadget plays. He may not need to do that at Penn State because he has more talent to work with, especially at the running back spot. Now, I shouldn't say that. Kansas did have Devin Neal. He's pretty darn good too. But you see my point. Just across the board, end to end, he's got more talent to work with. And, and I'll also be interested to see, Drew Allar's not the same quarterback as Jalen Daniels is. So it'll be interesting to see how he calls plays for Drew versus Jalen. All those things are things I'm looking forward to seeing in this game.
Michael Vick at BetUS.com. Catch an incredible 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits, plus 10% gambler's insurance. BetUS, my online sportsbook and casino.
What are the thoughts about how he'll handle Drew Allar?
So at least from kind of what I've heard is they do want to rely on these running backs and tight ends early in the season, especially this West Virginia game. And then they have Bowling Green and Kent State, the 2 games following. So then I think it goes into, we can figure out the passing game in those 2 games. And then they have UCLA, who wasn't too good on defense, and Illinois, who's a little better on defense, but not going to give you much of a problem offensively, which, in turn makes them a little worse on defense.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what they feel like is, let's do what we can to get out of West Virginia with a win, and then we'll figure out the passing game over the next 4 weeks. So I don't think you're going to see a crazy barrage. I know I didn't think that last year when Penn State played West Virginia, and Drew Allar had probably his best game in college. So,
yeah,
that kind of stuff, whenever you could talk about something for 3 months and it just doesn't happen. So
yeah.
We'll see there.
Yeah, and I mean, he played really well. No, I'm not taking anything away from him, but man, West Virginia there was a couple guys who started in that game that barely played the rest of the season,
right?
Because their performance was so bad. West Virginia didn't have the right personnel for that game, and I don't know if they had the right personnel on the roster a year ago, and they still played with Penn State, up until third quarter, early fourth quarter. So I think there were plays there to be made, but West Virginia just did not have the Jimmies and Joes, as they say, to match up with Penn State a year ago on both sides of the ball. And this year, hopefully this year, at least on paper, we should be a much more competitive game and closer game, because West Virginia did make those moves in the portal that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so I think, though, that Kotelnicki's going to find ways to just make Allar more comfortable early on. I've mentioned this before. I think physical wise and talent wise, Allar is pretty much as you could really ask for. I think that's why his recruiting ranking was as high as it was. It just comes down to mental stuff and him being comfortable. And I think at times last year when he was uncomfortable, his footwork got bad, and that's when he was missing guys. When he's in the pocket, moving around, moving up and throwing with confidence is when he was good. And I think Kotelnicki's just going to try to find ways to build his confidence early, easy passes, get him in a groove, because with him last year, it was either he was kind of really red hot in games or it was really bad. There wasn't a lot of in between with him. Like he tore up Maryland too. He had 3 or 4 really big games, and then Michigan, Ohio State, and then for parts of the Illinois game, he really struggled. So it was either really good or really bad. And I think they're just trying to maybe find a way to bring him to a more even keel state where he can be kind of a JJ McCarthy type, make the plays when we need them, but we're not asking you to be the 2019 LSU offense. And I think, there was a lot of hype going in last year that people thought for some reason they'd be the 2019 LSU offense just because of all the hype around Allar. So I think it's kind of now it's getting to the point where let's reel this in, rely on our talent at running back and receiver. And Drew, you just make the third down plays and, the red zone throws that we need. And we're not asking you to go for 350 every game and 3 touchdowns.
Yeah. Lean on what you're good at, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the key. And West Virginia, I see a lot of similarities in these two teams. As far as I think the way they'll approach the game, they both have 2 really good running backs.
Yep.
Speaking of which, I want to get your thoughts on Jaheim White, because Jaheim White didn't play for us a year ago when we played you guys. He wasn't, he was a true freshman, wasn't ready yet. They said his practice habits weren't good. He hadn't really gotten. I don't think he had gotten comfortable with the blocking aspect of it yet and all that. But man, when he came on hard and strong. So, what are your thoughts from the Penn State perspective on having to face Jaheim White?
Yeah, so I did watch a little bit of him as the season went on. I like to keep track of the team Penn State plays in the out-of-conference schedule, because there was the outside possibility that Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, and Auburn 11-1 tie. So, beating a 9-win West Virginia team would have helped Penn State in that situation. So I did keep tabs later in the year, but yeah, he definitely came on strong. And, I don't really compare people to Saquon Barkley, but Barkley, like the first few weeks of his freshman career, it was like not in a groove. And then like the light kind of switched about the 4th or 5th game. So, that happens for guys. And then obviously Barkley had 2 massive years after that. So, that could happen for White. I think it's something Penn State has to account for now, because it's obviously, I saw it's going to be pretty humid and hot down here at the game. I think like upper to mid 80s. So, both these teams have 2 running backs that they can rely on to wear down a defensive line, not just one guy. So the running backs stay fresh while you're trying to run down a defensive line. So I think, it is an added element for West Virginia that a year ago they were relying more on Donaldson. Now that they have a second guy to kind of go 50-50 with them, it makes him more dangerous. And obviously White showed a lot of nice things towards the end of the year. So I just think in the situation where these guys aren't used to playing a full 60 really yet, and it's going to be a hot, humid day, both teams trying to wear down the other team, it definitely helps West Virginia because Penn State would have had that advantage going into this game, having two guys they really like if White had not broken out the way he did at the end of last year. So I think that it does even the playing field there.
Yeah. Yeah. We're very excited. I mean, we're hoping he doesn't have what they call a sophomore slump in year two,
right? Which
CJ Donaldson kind of had a little bit last year, but he still had a decent year. He still ran for over 700 yards. But he also battled injury quite a bit last season, was banged up most of the year in his defense. But this year he's fully healthy for the first time probably since about halfway through his freshman season. He was playing with a banged up shoulder. So we have a healthy CJ Donaldson. We have Jaheim White who's healthy. Speaking of health, and I want to touch on injuries real quick. And by the way, this segment is brought to you by our sponsor, Katz, Kenner, Stone Street, and Butner, your personal injury and medical malpractice attorneys in West Virginia and Virginia. Check them out at yourlawyeryourvoice.com. All right. But are there any injuries that on the Penn State side of things that, West Virginia fans need to know about?
I think the only major one that Franklin brought up was Caden Saunders, who was kind of vying for receiving snaps, and he was Penn State's primary punt returner before Daquan Hardy went crazy. Daquan Hardy became the punt returner, I think the 5th or 6th game last year, and he still was first team all Big Ten at punt returner. Wow. Just went crazy in the second half of the season. I think he returned 2 for touchdowns.
Oh, gosh.
So that role was going to go back to Saunders because Hardy's off. He got drafted in the NFL, actually. So that role was going to go back to him. But Franklin said he's a little uncertain for this week. So I had to actually look because I didn't know who could possibly be behind him. But it sounds like Quinton Martin, the true freshman running back that is kind of a versatile guy. There was some talk about, hey, we're really good at running back. Should we just try him at receiver? Because he's a little bigger guy. I think he's close to 6'1". But as of right now, they're keeping him at running back. I think he's a guy who might get back there. Cam Wallace, another backup running back, might as well. I don't think Omari Evans is another one too. He's kind of one of the faster receivers. But I think if Saunders is banged up, and it was mentioned that Harrison Wallace, another receiver, dealt with some injuries during camp. So if they're a little banged up at receiver and they're already kind of thin there, I don't know if they'll risk another receiver back. Or Martin probably turning in the punt and the kick return duties without Saunders. So that's, as far as I know, that's the only major or even key injury I know of. They kind of got lucky. They're about the past 4 years or so, they've lost someone to a season-ending injury. Going way back to 2017, they lost John Reed, one of their best corners, and that kind of cost them in the Ohio State game later in the year. Then he tore his ACL in camp. They lost Smith Filbert, a defensive lineman, to an ACL injury in camp last year, and then Landon Tangle had to medically retire. So this year, though, they kind of avoided that, which was good. They did avoid the long-term camp injury from a key player.
Yeah. West Virginia, knock on wood, has for the most part this year. They did have one of their D linemen, Corey McIntyre, who was expected to be a pretty heavy contributor this year. He went down. He's going to be out for a chunk of the season. They don't know if it's going to be the whole season or just a portion of it, but they were expecting him to probably make it into the 2 deep. Not sure he was started, but he definitely would have played. But other than that, I mean, I think they're pretty much going to be healthy. There's a couple of guys who got banged up in camp that Coach Brown's not really saying much about.
Right.
I think both of these coaches are kind of trying to keep things close to the vest a little bit.
Yeah, Franklin's always been that way. He'll say
and Neil Brown,
bruises. Yeah,
right. And Neil Brown won't. Neil Brown's he'll tell you he's look. I'm fine with the depth chart. He actually is a proponent that every team should release a depth chart before every game and an injury report, just like the NFL does, because gambling is so prevalent
right
now in college football. Speaking of gambling, shout out to my other sponsor, BetUS Sportsbook and Casino. Take advantage of their 125% offer on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Check out the link in my description box. But because gambling's so prevalent now, he thinks every team should put out one. But if the opposing coach doesn't do it, he won't do it. He's just, a little gamesmanship there. I think it's kind of silly. These coaches they watch hours and hours and hours of film. They know who's going to play. You know what I mean?
Right.
They're prepared for everybody anyway. But I understand it. There's a lot of money and a lot on the line in these games. So, but back to my topic at hand is those are the only ones that have been mentioned. We did have a safety, Anthony Wilson, who missed some practices that was banged up, but the thought is he'll be back. He's expected to be a starter. He was a starter last year. And then one of our receivers, I think Traylon Ray, missed a couple practices too. He was banged up, but how long those injuries, are they going to miss games? I doubt it. But again, we don't know that for 100% certainty because the media has not been able to be at practice the last couple of weeks. And they, in his press conference today, they didn't even ask him about injuries, I don't think. So I'm sure they told him it was off the table before they walked in the room. Yeah. But anyway, that's, so injuries, it looks like both teams for the most part have most of their key guys for this game, which is good. I mean, I think that's good. One player for the Penn State fans that may be listening, one player that they can be on the lookout for on the defensive side is Josiah Trotter. He's a redshirt freshman linebacker that we got that was very heavily recruited. His brother was at Clemson. A lot of people thought he would go to Clemson, but he wanted to carve his own path, make his own way. So he came to West Virginia. Obviously, Penn State fans are probably very familiar with his dad, Jeremiah Trotter from the Philadelphia Eagles, former Eagles legend. But we're expecting big things out of him. He missed all of last season with a knee injury. So, and the Coach Brown said he likely would have started last year as a true freshman. That's how talented he is. We're expecting big things out of him too. So and then Trey Lathan, who missed most of the season with an injury, he's going to be back, and those two guys will probably start at the linebacker spot. We have another guy on our roster that played at Penn State, Fatorma Mulba. Yeah. Do you remember him?
A little bit, yeah. The name's definitely familiar.
Yeah. I think he was a third string D tackle early on at Penn State, and then he transferred over to West Virginia. Probably going to start at nose. If not, he'll be the backup there. Had a pretty good solid year last year, especially in the run stopping side. Very, very big body. But, West Virginia plays that 3 down front, and I think he's more of a 3 down front guy. I'm not sure he was a great fit at Penn State, so hopefully he'll have more success with us. I'm going to switch gears a second, ask you about it. We're going to talk recruiting for a minute.
All right.
I'm a little mad at Penn State right now.
Okay.
There's a young man who lives in my hometown named Daniel Jennings. Okay. That is a 2026 Penn State commit, defensive end, edge rusher. Fair. He chose Penn State over West Virginia. Obviously, I'm going to root for the young man because he's a hometown kid. But I don't know how closely you follow recruiting, Alex. I don't want to put you on the spot here, but do you know anything about Jennings, and have you heard anything around the program or around the fan base about, the excitement level about adding him and what they think he brings to the team?
Yeah, I haven't been up on recruiting as I used to be because I used to work for a website kind of covering it for them, and I don't do that anymore. So I've been a little back on it, but I do know the recruitment you're talking about, and I know they definitely were excited to get him out of West Virginia at the time. We'll see. He's kind of what they've been doing at defensive end, and I say this as Denai Dennis Sutton, who you'll see on Saturday, is 6'5", like 260 something, but they kind of like smaller defensive ends, guys that are in that 6'2", 6'3" range. They like the twitchier guys that can just get around the line, not worried about really power there. They like pass rush specialist types. Had success with them. Chop Robinson last year was only 6'3", in the 240s. Shaka Toney before him was even smaller than that, I think. And he averaged 6 sacks a year for 3 years with Penn State. So they do like the smaller guys. So I definitely think he fits that bill for them. Dion Barnes has done a really great job of recruiting the defensive line as a young coach. Just in his second year now, he he's going to be one of the best defensive line recruiters, I think, in the country, because he has connections in Philly. He used to coach there at the high school ranks. So he's very connected with all the high schools in the Philly area, which is definitely going to help him long term. So I wouldn't be mad about losing someone to Deion Barnes, because he's definitely an up-and-comer in the recruiting game and as a defensive line coach. I do know Jennings is the highest rated defensive player in the class right now. I know they're excited about that class. That class is so far away, but they like what they got early so far.
Well, a lot of things can change. I mean, in 2 years, the only thing, as a West Virginia fan, I'm hoping that they stay on him and are able to flip him. But I guess the only thing that we don't get a lot of. West Virginia's a very small state. Right. There's not a lot of Power 4 level talent in this state anyway. So when there are guys that are that good, we expect West Virginia to get them, right, or at least majority of them, and they do for the most part. I mean, Wyatt Milam, Zach Frazier, there's a bunch. The Steele brothers,
Gallagher, I guess.
Yeah, the Steele brothers were both West Virginia guys. I mean, so they do get the majority of them, But this one, this one was a little personal to me because he goes to school with my daughter.
Gotcha.
He's a local kid, but I do wish him the best. I hope if he does end up going to staying at Penn State and keeping his commitment and going there, I hope he has a great career and ends up playing in the league one day.
Yeah.
It just sucks that we weren't able to get him.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously hope he stays at Penn State and has a great career. But if this offseason has taught Penn State fans anything, it's that kind of losing someone right away in a recruitment isn't as bad anymore with the transfer portal.
Right.
When Penn State lost Nolan Rucci and Julian Fleming back-to-back #1 player in Pennsylvania recruiting classes, there was a lot of hate towards James Franklin and a lot of what are we doing here, losing 2 5-stars in our backyard, and now they're both on the roster this year. So you never know how it's going to work out. I think the transfer portal and all that has kind of lessened blows in recruiting. Because for sure. You can replace holes that you had in recruiting through that. It's pretty much like free agency. You can either develop or sign someone is kind of the way it's going. And I just think that those relationships are important, because if 2 years later a kid's on the second or third string and he thinks he should be first or second, and you still have some kind of relationship, or you have, because obviously a lot of this stuff is called back channeling, I guess, where it's not official at first, still having connections that you could reach out to and be like, hey, is he happy here? Is there any thought that maybe he'd be open to coming back? So I do think even if you don't get someone right away out of high school, that they're not really over anymore until they end up in the NFL.
Right. Yep. So you mentioned Rodney Gallagher's name a minute ago.
Yeah.
Did Penn State fans expect to get Gallagher, or did they kind of feel all along that he was probably going to West Virginia?
I think at the beginning, Penn State fans were pretty confident about him. The Jahan Dotson comp came around, and that got excited. He started talking about how Penn State was going to try to make him like Jahan Dotson, and then it became a little more clear towards the middle of his recruitment that he was trending towards West Virginia. But then I know towards the end of his recruitment, Neil Brown was kind of on the hot seat a little bit. Right. And he came back to Penn State for a visit or two, and was just kind of like, I want to make sure I'm comfortable here in case there was a change at West Virginia. So then, there was some hope again, but then Brown kind of righted the ship there at the end of that season, stayed, and obviously has gotten a lot better. So there was optimism at times with that one. I'm not going to say, I know what people like to say when the kid doesn't go to the school, oh, we didn't really need him or want him anyway. I think Penn State definitely would have taken him with the current situation of the receiving room. So I do think that is a blow for sure.
Our fans are the opposite. They say, well, we should have got him, man. Even when they didn't really recruit a kid hard.
Yeah.
Our fans are, and I'm guilty of it too, but we have a tendency to be super pessimistic. But anyway, that was interesting. And I don't know if you heard this or not, but I don't know how much you follow West Virginia, but they've got him playing both sides of the ball some.
I think I did hear that, yeah.
So I don't expect to see them put him on defense in this game. I wouldn't think. but they have been pretty impressed with what he can do. They said he's actually done really good. Neil Brown made a comment at one of the pressers, and I personally think he was doing this to motivate the other guys.
Right.
But he made a comment that right now he was the best man defender on the team. So, but I thought that was,
I can
saying
see
a lot.
I know he's a great athlete. He had some basketball looks too, I'm pretty sure. I think he was rated as a 3-star in basketball, actually, which
he was.
That's impressive. That makes me think of the dude that went to Gonzaga, Suggs. He was like a 4-star quarterback, but a 5-star point guard or whatever. Like, that's pretty crazy to be that good in 2 sports. But
well, do you remember Deuce McBride? I'm sorry. Do you remember Deuce McBride that played point guard?
Yeah, I remember the name. Yeah.
He was also a highly recruited basketball player as well, point guard. I'm sorry, highly recruited football player. He played quarterback for his high school. But anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think early on when Penn State was recruiting Gallagher, there was actually an argument between which side of the ball was going to get him. And then the offense did win out in the end, and they were strictly recruiting him offensively after that. I do remember that kind of being a thing now that you brought that up kind of early on in his recruitment.
Yeah, because he played quarterback in high school, and he's not really a natural quarterback. They just wanted the ball in his hands as much as possible. But there's also some of the fan bases, there's a theory out there amongst the fan base that they're trying so hard to keep Rodney because he's going to be every offseason, he's going to have people courting him to try to get him to leave, that they're trying their best to find ways to get him on the field as much as possible.
Yeah,
so
it makes sense.
Maybe that's the case. But either way, I don't think they would put him over there if they didn't think he could do it. So, and he even changed his number to 24 so that he could play defense if needed. I thought that was interesting because we already have a 2. He was 2 before, and we already have a number 2 on defense. Aubrey Burks is number 2. So by changing numbers, it allows him to play either side of the ball without having to change numbers. So
yeah, I always forget about that in college, the amount of double numbers. It's funny.
Yeah, it can be confusing. But anyway, well, listen, man, I really appreciate you coming on one more time. Let the folks know where they can find you and your work.
Yeah, so the podcast, Booze, Bets, and Ball, it does say a Penn State football podcast. We did clarify that if you look it up on any podcast platform. But the YouTube stuff under Whitaker Media, you can find me there. The Twitter, the podcast Twitter is at the number 3 and then the letter B underscore pod PSU. And then obviously PSU Strong too. The stuff I do there sometimes, getting back into it. Kind of took the summer off, but
I got you.
Yeah, it's always great to talk to you guys. I love coming on, getting to know other fan bases. Obviously, it's a lot of fun. Looking forward to coming down to West Virginia this weekend. So
yeah,
I'm excited for it. And I think the nice thing is that with the playoff at 12 teams, your season's not over if you lose this game for both teams week 1. It's a hard challenge for both teams week 1 right out of the chute. So I think it's very nice. Obviously, one fan base is going to leave happier than the other, but the other one's not devastated already looking at 2025.
Yeah, and that's one thing I hope for you fans listening to this, if West Virginia loses this game, it is not the end of the world. Now, if we get blown out and lose by 30 or 40 points, then we can have a different conversation. Right. But if it's a close game and West Virginia drops the game, man, we still have a whole Big 12 conference schedule to play, and we have our biggest rival, who I'm not going to mention, the team up I-79. That game's still on the docket too. So losing to Penn State, although it would be great to win it, losing the game is not going to derail the season. So great point, Alec. And now Penn State, though, I'm glad you brought that up. And I was going to let you go, but
it's okay.
I could do this all night. When you look at Penn State's schedule, personally, I think they got a pretty good schedule. I think they have a really legit chance to win the Big Ten this year, or at least get a playoff spot because they don't play Michigan, which that's a whole nother conversation. They're a dumpster fire right now, but they don't play Oregon, and they get Ohio State at home. Now, they do have to travel to USC, I think. Yeah. But I think Penn State can beat USC on the road. But to me, that favorable lines up pretty well for you guys, for Penn State, to make a run in the Big Ten and at least get in the playoffs. But losing to West Virginia, though, with that strength of schedule, would you think that would hurt them at all?
I think a little. I think though, if West Virginia went on to have a year similar to last year, where they won, beat somewhere between 8 to 10 games, and if you win 8 to 10, or at least 9 to 10, you're ranked. Yeah. I think that would help week 1 on the road. They'd probably have to sweep the rest of the road games though, and that includes at USC and at Wisconsin, and then Ohio State. I think I'm past the point of picking Penn State to win up to beat Ohio State until I really should believe it, and I don't right now. Right. So I think those are your 2 losses, and Ohio State goes on to be 12-1, 13-0, whatever happens between them and Oregon, because they do play each other this year. I think that 10-2 is good enough to get in.
Right, I do too.
So, but I think that's kind of the path. I think it has to be a loss to USC on the road, and then USC stays ranked, or a loss to West Virginia on the road, and West Virginia goes on to have a year similar to last year. I think that one of those 2, along with a loss and a somewhat close loss to Ohio State, is the 2-loss path to get in. I would say that's what it is. I mean, It's interesting to me though, because last time Penn State won the Big Ten was 2016. That year, they also had 2 new coordinators, and they dropped an out-of-conference game early. So I see some similarities maybe this year if Penn State was to lose to West Virginia this week.
Yeah. See, and the reason I say that I think it's I think Penn State has more to lose in this game than West Virginia does, because to me, the only way West Virginia is likely going to get into the playoff anyway is if they win the Big 12. Mm-hmm. Because the Big 12 is likely only going to get, because they're just going to beat each other up probably in the Big 12 this year. There's so much parity in that conference. And I'm not sure the strength of schedule, because of the Big 12's, we don't really have any blue bloods in our conference. I'm not sure, I'm not sure a 9-3 team from the Big 12 is going, or even a 10-2 team potentially may not get in unless they win it, because of you guys and Ohio State and Alabama, Georgia. They're all going to have higher strength of schedules, at least in theory.
Yeah,
you would think so by the end of the season. So I think West Virginia, because they still have a whole Big 12 schedule to play, and winning the Big 12 at the end of the day is the ultimate goal anyway.
Right.
I think West Virginia losing this game, to me, not really that big a deal. Like I said, now if it's a blowout and West Virginia just looks horrible, that's different. But if they're competitive, I want to see them be more competitive than a year ago. I want them to see competitive all 4 quarters, and don't let their second string drive down the field and punch it in the end zone at the end of the game. That was it. But anyway, that's my view on it. But again, it's all a matter of, at the end of the day, we don't know how these schedules are going to shake out. We don't know how good these teams are going to be that these teams are playing. So it's all just a crapshoot. But anyway, well, man, listen, this time I actually am going to let you go. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I can't wait to do this again.
Yeah.
And good luck the rest of the season.
Yeah, you guys too. I look forward to seeing everyone down there. It should be a fun week.
Yeah. Maybe we'll get lucky and run into each other, man.
Yeah, we'll try. We'll definitely try. I know the noon start doesn't help stuff like that, but
it does not.
I've got a lot of time to do everything.
Not even have time to tailgate for me.
Yeah, not a fan. I did want to experience it a little more in depth, but it is what it is with Big Noon. Yeah. We've been dealing with it for a few years now.
Yeah. Well, Alec, thanks again, man.
You got it.
Anytime. Everybody be sure to cue Country Roads and have a top shelf day.